This is John Jackman's journal. He was a soldier with the 9th Kentucky Infantry. This episode is called Wounded, June 14th, 1864. Cloudy early this morning, but cleared up at 7 o'clock. The adjutant and I having made a bed on a brush pile and spliced blankets. I slept well last night. The sun is shining bright, which is calculated to make us feel lively after the long, rainy spell. Enemy shelling to our right. June 14th, 1864, continued. Was wounded a few minutes after making the notes June 14th, and I did not write any more in my journal for nearly 3 months. I shall try and give an account of my hospital experience during the time named in a brief manner. About 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, on June 14th, Captain John W. Gillum and I were sitting by the colonel's fire, a little to the rear of the regiment. For 2 days, not a shell had been thrown at our position, and when a shell came shrieking over the mountain to our left, I remarked to the captain that some general and his staff, no doubt, had ridden up to the crest of the hill, and the Federal batteries were throwing shells at them. "Yes," said the captain, "and I hope some of them will get shot. A general can't ride around the lines without a regiment of staff at his heels." About this time, we heard the second shell strike. I thought it struck into the side of the hill, but it had struck Lieutenant General Leonidas Polk. Where he was killed was not 100 yards from us, but the trees were so thick we could not see from where we were what was going on, and we did not learn what had happened for some minutes. Soon after, an order came for a report to be sent to brigade headquarters, and I sat down to write it out. Several of the enemy's batteries had then opened fire, but as we were a little under the hill, I thought we were in no great danger from the shells which were flying over. In fact, we had gotten so used to shells that we scarcely noticed them. I was only a few minutes writing the report, and raised my head to ask the colonel if I should sign his name to the paper, and had bent over and had about finished signing the paper when suddenly everything got dark, and I became unconscious. If I had been sitting erect when the fragment of shell struck me, I never would have known what hurt me. When I came to my senses, Dr. B.L. Hester, our assistant surgeon, and Captain Gillum were lifting me up off the ground. I stood on my feet, and not feeling any pain, I could not imagine, at first, what was the matter. The first thought that entered my mind was that my head was gone, and I put my hand up to ascertain whether it was still on my shoulders. I did not hear the piece of shell coming, and it was such a quick, sharp lick, I did not feel it strike. The fragment probably weighed little more than a pound. It came like a minnie ball. After glancing off my head, it struck against a rock, then bounced and struck Colonel John W. Caldwell on the leg, but did not hurt him severely. There were several sitting around close together, and they said there was a sudden scattering of the staff. After Dr. Hester had bound up my wound, there was so little pain, I thought it was no use to go to the hospital. My head only felt a little dizzy, but the doctor said I had better go to the field hospital and stay a day or two, as I was not very well anyway. He wished to send his horse back, and I rode him to the field hospital. Dr. B. again dressed my wound, putting a ligature on a vein that was cut. He would not let me eat anything at dinner but a little boiled rice, and in the evening had me sent to Marietta. He told me that the wound would turn out to be more serious than I thought. After arriving at the distributing hospital in Marietta, my head got quite sore and painful. At 9 o'clock at night, I took the train for Atlanta. General Polk's remains were taken down on the same train. I slept on a bench at the distributing hospital in Atlanta the remainder of the night. The breakfast was tough beef, old baker's bread, and coffee that had flies in it, and I longed for the hard tack and cornbread, which I had left at the front. The adjutant having given me a letter of introduction to his aunt in Covington, 40 miles towards Augusta. I wished to go there, but my name was put on the Noonan list. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the train left for Noonan, Georgia, and arrived there at noon. I was taken to Ward No. 1, Bragg Hospital, Dr. Joshua Gore of Bloomfield, Kentucky, in charge. The room in which I was placed, the Masonic Hall, had about 30 beds, but few of them being occupied, and mostly by men from our brigade. The room was clean as could be, and the beds really comfortable. I had been dreading the hospital all the time, never having been in but one general hospital before, which I did not like much, but I was agreeably disappointed at finding everything so nice. John J. Woolfolk of Arkansas, ward master. McNeely of Tennessee, first nurse. Baldridge of Arkansas, second. And Smith of Georgia, third, all clever gentlemen. Croft McClarty of the 4th was in the room, wounded, the only one I knew at first. I immediately went to bed for a sleep, and scarcely woke until the next evening. For several days after being in the hospital, I imagined I could hear the whizzing of many bullets and the thunder of artillery. I had become so accustomed to such sounds. The next day, after being in the hospital, I had to take medicine for something like intermittent fever. I had been unwell for a week or so. Several days before I got up, my head did not give me a great deal of pain at first, but after being in the hospital perhaps a little more than a week, my wound became inflamed and gangrene ensued, which threw me into a high state of fever. Old Dr. Wallace Estill, our ward surgeon, who was 75 years of age and had been practicing surgery for more than 50 years, soon got the gangrene out by applying nitric acid, iodine, etc. The fever still kept with me, and the doctor thought I would go up. Dr. Estill about this time took sick, and Dr. Gore prescribed for the ward. He immediately commenced giving me medicine to reduce my system. In about a week the fever left me, but I was so weak I could not get up, and had to keep my bed for some time. While in this condition, a force of Federal cavalry came to Moore's Bridge, on the Chattahoochee, about 10 miles from town, and threatened a raid of the place. The evacuation commenced about dark. All the hospital rangers able to walk cleared out. There were 2 left in my room, besides myself, not able to move. Smith, one of the nurses, and Watson, the ward clerk, were left with us. The citizens all left too. A moving mass of carriages, carts, wagons, lowing herds, horses, sheep, goats, and people moved through the streets. Soon the town was left, in a manner, desolate. The night wore away, and no raid came. The day advanced, and though the raiding column was reported in 4 miles of town at daylight, yet they did not come. Late in the evening, all of the refugees came back, and matters went on as usual. Nothing took place again of interest until McCook's raid came about the last of July. I was then able to walk about in the street a little. That morning I was standing on the corner and saw the advance of the raid dash down toward the railroad depot. General Roddy's brigade happened to be at the depot on a train and saved the town. The raid went around the place and was surrounded by Wheeler 4 miles beyond, and most of the force captured. A good many wounded were brought into town of both sides. We could hear the small arms quite distinctly, which sounded very natural. There was but little artillery firing. There was great confusion in town all day. The streets were blocked up with cavalry for a time. Prisoners were brought in by squads for several days after the fight. The old citizens often brought in prisoners, which they guarded very closely while in their charge. August the 10th. The hospitals being broken up at Noonan with other sick to be transferred to Macon, Georgia, I took the train for Atlanta at 10 o'clock in the morning. During the afternoon, we got to East Point, 7 miles from Atlanta, where the Macon and Western Road branches off, and had to lie over until dark. The brigade hospital being at East Point, I saw Dr. B and several of the boys from the regiment. The sharpshooters were banging away not very far off, and the cannon were thundering and the shells crashing through the woods, all of which reminded me of old times. The train was very much crowded with wounded and sick, and having learned our baggage was stored at Griffin, I got off the train at that place to get mine. I slept until morning on a pile of cross ties, got my baggage, and took the 9 o'clock train, passenger, for Macon, where arrived at 1 p.m. that evening. J.L., First Sergeant of Company B, and I went out to the Fairground Hospital, 2 miles from the depot, in the edge of Vineville, which is part of Macon. We were transported out in a wagon. The hospital was intense, and being crowded, we had to take a tent without any beds in it. Our fare was awful. A day or two after, Dr. Fox of Kentucky, the steward, moved us into another ward. Dr. Jones, a very clever man from Georgia, was ward surgeon. We got with several from our regiment and brigade. I found the attendants very clever. I could now walk about considerably, and Jimmy L. and I every evening took a walk through Vineville and sometimes as far as Macon. Jimmy was a great admirer of the ladies and would walk 2 miles any time to see a young lady, even promenading the sidewalk. I received attention from several ladies while at the Fairground Hospital. One, Miss Kate B., a very pretty young lady, September 4th, went before the Medical Examination Board and got a furlough for 60 days. While getting ready to leave on furlough, I took too much exercise, getting my head in such a fix that I had to lie in bed until September 12th, when, though not really able to travel, I went to town in an ambulance, and at 4 p.m. took the train for Augusta via Millen. I got in with some young ladies at the depot who gave me a nice dinner out of their basket, and when the train was ready, I helped them into a car, thereby getting a seat in the ladies' coach. The train, in motion, did not agree well with my head. 30 miles from the city, my lady friends got off, urging me to come to see them before I went back to the army. I gave a gentleman part of my seat. When nearly to Millen and late at night, a young lady came in who could not find a seat, and as I liked her appearance, I woke my friend out of a gentle nap, and the young lady was seated. She was going to Augusta to see her brother in the hospital. We got to Millen at 12 o'clock at night and had to change cars. By being with a lady, I got into a ladies' car again. Seeing a woman in distress, having several little children, and no one to assist her, I was some time in carrying children from one train to the other and received many thanks. I never saw such a jam of women in my life as was in that car. They kept crowding in at every station and kept up a perfect fighting and scratching. We got to Augusta at daylight. I took dinner with Lieutenant S. September 14th. Took the train for Warrenton, Georgia, 50 miles toward Atlanta on the state road, 5 miles from the junction on Mayfield Road. Got to Warrenton at 1 p.m. and took dinner at the Warrenton Hotel. Stayed all night at the same place, September 15th. Not liking the country about Warrenton and thinking it would be necessary to have my head trepanned, I left on the train for Augusta at 1 p.m., left Augusta at 7 o'clock p.m., and all night running to Macon. No sleep, September 16th. Took the train on the Southwest Road for Americus at 8 a.m. and arrived at Americus at noon. Went to Bragg Hospital. I again got in Ward Number 1, the same attendants being in charge, save Baldridge and Smith. I also was placed in the Masonic Hall, a large room with nearly 50 beds in it, but there were few patients in the room. All the rats were glad to see me back again. My head was hurting me from loss of sleep, etc., and I went to bed. Americus is a town of about 3 or 4 thousand inhabitants. The business part of the town had lately been destroyed by fire. There are many fine residences in the suburbs. The town, though, while I was there, looked much dilapidated, the effects of the war. The people generally were kind to the soldiers, bringing provisions to the sick, etc. The young ladies were thick as hops, and, as a general thing, very good-looking. Being 2 hospitals in the place, a good many rats were about the streets. September 22nd. Wrote home, "The weather is very hot, and has been since I have been here. My wound does not seem to be healing any, and my head is still much affected." September 23rd. Writing up my journal, which had gotten behind since being in hospital. While on the campaign, I kept my notes on scraps of paper, which I have today copied into my memorandum, made of old blanks while at Dalton. Has been a warm, cloudy day, rained in the evening. September 25th. Went to church. In the evening attended the funeral service of Mr. B., a Tennessee soldier and husband of one of our matrons. I walked from the church to the cemetery half a mile, which came near fixing me. I had difficulty in getting back to my room. September 26th. Being Monday, many ladies at the hospital with delicacies for the sick. From my walk last evening my head feels crazy and bad. Wrote to some of the boys. At night an alarm of fire at the Goober oil factory, but the flames were soon put out. I thought the balance of the town was going to be burned. October 2nd. Today my term of service expired, 3 years. When I joined the Army, I little thought the war would last so long. Went to church. 3 churches in town, Baptist, Methodist, and Presbyterian. Episcopal service held at the Presbyterian Church on Sabbath evenings. These churches are crowded with women. Few men, save the rats. The week past has been very dull, out of books. Sometimes I would go to the courthouse, part of the hospital, and read old papers. The weather has been very hot, which does not agree with me. The hospital fare is now very coarse. Will be better, so says Steward H. This concludes the 14th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe for more stories and leave a comment.